Okay, we're on. Good afternoon, board members and members of the media. Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a dar comienzo a la conferencia de prensa. Let's get started. First question, please raise your hand or you can write it in the chat box. Alex, Cyber News, go ahead.
Sí, me gustaría.
Yes, I'd like to ask two questions and a follow-up question if necessary. The first question about what you were asked about the State Election Commission, and I know you must be aware that it has been the object of criticism with regard to the disaster that this event was. To this day, 300,000 ballots have not been counted when Mexico counted more than 60 million ballots in one day. And basically, they were blaming this on the fact that the process to request funds and the approval thereof had been untimely, and this made the primary process difficult. And they're making these comments, and obviously we have our general elections coming up, so I'd like to know how quickly or if the criticism has been valid on the part of the State Election Commission as to the process for approving the funds, and them saying that they think it's been too slow.
So I guess I'll answer that, yeah. As I mentioned in the earlier remarks, the amounts that were approved for the Election Commission in this year were significantly higher than the amounts that were available for 2020. That's point one. I've been reading, a lot of the stories about what happened in the election, and there's a lot of finger pointing going around, right? Pointing as this is what happened. That's a lot of different things happened. I don't think it was resources that it was the issue. Right. There's everything that's talking. I've seen lots of things about machines, what was happening in different polling sites. The point I think that I made then, I'll make now. We have no additional request. If there is a request for additional funds for the Election Commission, we will review that request and talk to the Election Commission about what the resources are that they need and be open to that. And again, a lot of people don't want to accept responsibility for what happened. That's fine. As far as what the Oversight Board is responsible for, which is, accessing funding, we gave a significant increase. We'll be open to giving more as soon as we have a request before us. And we also will engage with the commission.
But I would like to know if this request for funds would be available to purchase new equipment, would you have no objection to the purchase of additional equipment or other needs the commission may request that would allow these upcoming November elections be able to be carried out without any issues, including having generators available in case Luma again, a bird would again cause the grid to fail.
Elections are some of the most important things that we do. If the board comes to us and says that we need generators to make sure that the lights are on for the elections, yeah, and we think that's reasonable, that's something we would consider. If there's additional machines that they want, we don't have that before us. But yes, we would consider funding additional machines as well. So the question is, yeah, we're open to funding all of those. There are no things that we're sitting here saying, no, we won't be open to funding that. So if they come to us, with requests, we'll evaluate them, working with the government on what realistically they need. But resources should not be an issue with regard to having a fair, successful elections. So we'll be open to meeting with them and seeing what their requests are.
Thank you, Robert. Next question is Pedro Menendez from El Vocero. He would like to comment about the concern expressed by the governor concerning an apparent overreach by the Oversight Board on the requirements for balanced budgets included in the certified fiscal plan.
PROMESA is pretty clear on the standards with regard, and you should just look at it because you don't need to take my word for it because it's written in black and white. One of the standards are submission of a budget in accordance with modified accrued principles. Another standard is that you complete the year with a budget that was balanced according to principles of modified accrual. That's in the black and white text of the promesa statute. So we're talking, and what we attempt to do here is make clear what the standards are so there is no ambiguity going forward, right? Modified accrual, again, is a standard that is a difficult standard. We don't even have audited financial statements that go back to the last couple of years. We're back on 22 and we just received 23. The standard is you have audited financial statements about 180 days after the close of the year. There are no practices presently right now at the end of the fiscal year to close the fiscal year so you know actually how much you've spent. This is something I haven't seen before, and it's not a practice that any functioning government or private entity, right, would have. You have to be able to close your books. You have to be able to follow cash. So what we want to do is let's look at the standards, and then let's also provide all the resources, everything you need in order to comply, so that the government can do that, so that you know exactly how much is spent, so you can track this, so this doesn't happen again. The other thing the governor pointed out was with regard to the criteria for adequate market access. It's important that we use all the words that are in the statute. It's adequate market access at reasonable rates. And when we talk about the market working, unfortunately, in 2015, when Puerto Rico was going bankrupt, Puerto Rico had an investment grade credit rating. At a time when they had debt that there was no reasonable way they were going to be able to afford to pay it back. When the governor would come and say, I can't afford to pay the debt, Puerto Rico had an investment grade credit rating. There was a failure there by a lot of people in that chain, including the people that were rating those bonds that were promising it. And as a result of that failure, tens of millions of dollars have been wiped out by people who invested in there. We're beyond that, and we were able to fix that. The board has been able to work with the Title III courts to restructure the debt, so you're able to wipe out tens of billions of dollars in debt going forward. Well, the purpose of PROMESA was to make sure that that never happens again, so that you don't go back to that. So it's not an overreach. These standards are hard. It's difficult to meet these standards. We got to the point of restructuring the debt. Now we have to make sure we have balanced budgets, submitted budgets that are balanced budgets under modified accrual, and we have adequate access to the credit markets. And we want to get there as fast as possible. But we also want to make sure we actually get there. We don't want to say that we're there when we really weren't, because that would be a disservice to everyone. And let's remember that you worked hard to do this, right? 16 consecutive years of spending more than you take in and borrowing $70 billion that you couldn't afford. So I understand, that we're looking at is the first time that we've actually looked at the standards and published something on it, and we're talking about it. And I think it's a conversation that we have to make sure not only that we're clear on what the standards are, but what do we need to achieve those? And we need to all double down on the efforts to make sure that happens, because the board is finite and the board has to go away. And everything that the board is doing with regard to managing the finances, I agree with the governor. All of that needs to get transferred over to the government to do. And they're going to be doing it going forward and then staying within their budget. And again, throughout PROMESA is the theme of fiscal responsibility, the words specifically. So this is the first time that we're actually going through it and saying it. And the reason it is because we recognize that we're in that phase where the board is we're in the path to exit. And on the path to exit, we want to make sure that we're hitting all the criteria so that we can be clear as to what the standards are for exiting. So it's a conversation we need to have. But again, there's a lot of failures that got us here. we want to make sure that going forward, we are making the changes and we're working with the budget office and we're working with the government so that we can do those things in all of the entities, right, as well. Because there are entities right now that actually they have some debt they've issued, but they also don't have balanced budgets, that they are actually spending off of reserves in order to balance their budgets. And that would mean that when their reserves are gone, unless that profile changes, you're going to be back to deficits or back to doing something again. So we want to be more public about it. We want to be more transparent about it. And we want to make sure that everyone understands kind of what we're looking at. We want that dialogue to continue.
Hey, Robert, can I comment a little bit on that as well? I can't, being a former long-term budget director myself of a couple of different states and understanding this process, I really think that it would be beneficial if the dialogue would change rather than just checking boxes to actually transforming the system, right? As you just said. I mean, right now, I mean, as we're here at the Oversight Board, we have balanced budgets, right? But it'll be interesting to see if the governor and the legislature pass a budget before the end of this fiscal year. They don't have a lot of time. But I think it's incumbent upon them to actually show that they can govern and manage the budget, pass on-time budgets, live within the budgets, control spending, get the revenues in control to make sure they're not overspending the budget, look at all the different consensus forecasting, all the best practices that you talked about in the fiscal plan update. And I think that if we can see a willingness or kind of a transformation, but right now as we speak, we're having to block stuff that they're passing that they don't have any money to pay for. And so I think instead of just saying, let's check boxes to get the Oversight Board out of here, if that's the exercise, and we all want to leave as quickly as we can. I mean, Puerto Rico should be governed by its elected officials. I'm in full agreement of that. But the elected officials need to show that they can govern the budget. They're not going to revert back to the old practices that put them right into bankruptcy. Because if you continue to overspend and do the things that we're having to block while we're here, if they continue that practice, if they continue not being able to get a budget through the legislature on time, then Puerto Rico is going to wind back up in insolvency. And all this money that's been spent and all this effort will be for naught. So I think rather than just saying, hey, the Oversight Board, capped the debt, got us out of bankruptcy, that's great. We did that. We've worked hard to do that. But I think that the fastest path to the exit of the board will be for the government to work with us and say, yes, we are showing that we can self-govern financially and incorporate these best practices, and we can make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you, John and Robert. Next question, I think Nuevo Dia, Manuel Guillama had some question. Manuel, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. For Mr. Mujica, I'd like for him to address the governor's prior comment that he said that he was surprised that the FOMB was presenting the budget in this particular meeting. Was there any misunderstanding, or why wasn't the governor aware that the board was going to pass or certify the FY 2025 budget in this meeting?
Yeah. Is a misunderstanding. So that's period. Our budget offices have been working together to put together that budget. That budget is largely the governor's budget. And many of his initiatives, are in there. The legislature was passing something, and I think they passed something either yesterday. So originally wasn't the intent to do it at this meeting. We advanced it as a result of that. There was a communication issue, so he wasn't aware. But there's nothing in there that he's not aware of. It was more of he wasn't aware that we were actually certifying it. And we're not actually certifying, just approving it to be sent to the legislature. As the chairman mentioned earlier, he will have an opportunity to look at the budget again once the legislature acts, and obviously he'd be part of the discussions as we move forward.
Sure. And getting into some of the initiatives that were denied in the notice of violations back in May, I I'd like to know if the board finally included both the decentralization initiative for the Department of Education, which I believe was around 20 million that the government requested for that, and also the social reconstruction initiative that was about 21 million, I believe, and was also denied in the notice of violations. What did the board do regarding those two initiatives?
Yeah, on the decentralization, we increased money for the Department of Education by, I believe, about $140 million. And within that would be the $20 million for the decentralization, subject to them giving us a plan, because we need a plan and we needed some more information about that. So there is additional dollars in the budget for that. It's much more than the 20 million, but the 20 billion was within that 140 that was approved. And as far as the social reconstruction dollars, there are dollars in there as well for that purpose.
Sure. For the social reconstruction plan, is that allocation precondition or subject to any milestone requirements or anything like that?
I think there are some additional, we want a full plan on what it is. I think the ideas and the dollars might be different. And this is something, again, we'll work on with the legislature as well. This is just the first step of the process. We have a long way to go between now and June 30th. And hopefully in that time, we'll be working with the governor to get additional information that what we need to make sure, that we can just move those dollars quickly. Our goal is not to hold back them, is want to make sure that as we fund these initiatives, they're funded and we're going to get the results out of these initiatives, that we want, not just to spend the dollars, but actually get the results, because they are important.
Sure. And a couple more things. What are the requirements for the additional allocation for the University of Puerto Rico, those $102 million? I got one more thing after that, and I think that would be it.
Sure. For the university, last year was the first year we increased funding for the university by 20% of what the transfer is from the central government. It's $102 million. We've been working with the governing board, the president's office, as well as many people in the governor's administration on allocating those doctors pursuant to a plan that is a forward-looking plan for the future of the university. All of those requirements, we're still working on them with the university presently, and we're meeting every other week, every 3 weeks. I don't know the exact cadence, but we've been meeting for months with them to kind of work this out. We have identified some criteria. Some of them are expanding curriculum and availability of courses for students. Some of that relates to giving more money into the classroom, We have to recognize that the university has lost a significant amount of enrollment, Their enrollment is down 32%. Their budget has stayed overall, 1.13 billion has stayed virtually flat. It's gone down a little bit, but nowhere near the reflection of loss in enrollment, nor should it. And now we actually want to add more dollars. The current year's funding is not spent yet. And in the next year's budget, we will work with the legislature and the governor to see if we're going to add even another 102, to that. But we want to work with the governing board. We want to work with the president's office, and we want to make sure that money is going to go to the classroom. The money is going to go to teaching, and it's going to go to figuring out what the university needs to do to be competitive and successful going forward. Because you're seeing some of the crisis in the university is unique to Puerto Rico, but some of it is what's going on in public education, higher education institutions across the nation. And some in Puerto Rico have closed as well. So we want to build up the university. We want to increase the funding. We just want to make sure it's done correctly.
Sure. One last thing, during the fiscal plan discussion, it was mentioned that there was going to be a bigger emphasis on the planning of capital projects, forward-looking capital projects, and a better planning process. The Planning Board of Puerto Rico already has the what they call the PICA, the Plan de Inversión a 4 años, and I want to know if that model that Puerto Rico currently uses for its capital project planning doesn't comply with the FOMB standards. What have to be the reforms that the FOMB will be pushing for in the capital plan initiatives?
Yeah. One of the biggest initiatives in the fiscal plan is building the financial capability in the government, specifically in relation to how you manage the current resources and how you manage your capital resources. So in the board exits, right, the government's doing it completely on its own. Capital planning by agency is important to understand when are you going to need access to the capital markets. If you have billions of dollars in an agency, and it's important to have I haven't seen, I don't know that you have, a public plan, project by project in an agency. This is what we need. This is what we're funding. This is where the resources are coming from, right? For the next 20 years. That's normal. Like that is what many places do. And I think that's part of how we got here, right? We weren't doing that. It's year to year, fund whatever project is the shiny project today, politically popular, and you just do it that way. The discipline of having a plan is, this is the plan, because we know these are the roads we have to fix. These are the water pipes we have to fix. This is the infrastructure that we need to fix. And that's the plan. And we're going to execute on the plan. It also requires accountability. Once you know that, you also know where are you today, tomorrow, and that. And just building that planning capacity tied to the resources, right? It can't be just separate in the board, but it's not tied to the budget and not tied to the resources. It has to be, everything has to be tied to the amount of resources you have and the budget. That's where the disconnect presently is in the system. The budget agency doesn't actually have a full understanding of all the capital spending, of everything that the agencies are doing, and you don't have it on the capital side. So that is what we need to do. We need to do it with the government, and we need to build that capacity there. It's one of the major initiatives in this fiscal plan. It will take some time, but all of the focus needs to be on that financial planning. And the capitals planning that we're requiring here is nothing more than what is done in the vast majority of other places. And it is what the capital markets require when they look at it. I've faced the agencies many, many times, and we know what they're looking for. We're not focused on what any individual agency is looking for. It's the overall theme. These are the kinds of things that they look for a solvent entity.
Gracias, Robert. Next question is John Marino from New York.
Yeah, hi, Director Mojica. I think you addressed most of my questions, but I think the governor did say that the fiscal plan establishes that the Commonwealth has to have an investment grade credit rating in order to, check that market access box. I just wanted to clarify that that's the case. I haven't had a chance to look at the certified plan yet.
Yeah, it doesn't say that. It stops short of saying that. What we're saying is Puerto Rico had an investment grade rating in 2015. So it met that standard. It had it. Every state has an investment grade rating. So did Puerto Rico. Every state still does. What we are saying in the fiscal plan is, let's just use the standards by which the agencies look at to get an investment grade rating as a measure for achieving market access, of achieving what they're going to be looking for. Because I think the goal would be, right, we want Puerto Rico to return to investment grade, to have an investment grade rating, right? Sure. You don't want them to go in and have junk bond status. You didn't have it before, and you don't need to say that that's the only thing that we can achieve. You should be able to, think that you can get higher than that because you did and you can. So what we're saying is, let's look at, we didn't just pick what one agency, we're kind of let's look at the basket of all of the things. We know the kinds of things they look for. They look for liquidity, right? They look for planning. They look for reserves, right? These are the kinds of things that the agencies are looking for. So let's use the criteria by which you would get an investment grade rating as a measure so that it's not so ambiguous and open, so you can see what those things are. So what you see in the fiscal plan, if you do look at it, you'll see we're just using an example in there, right? These are the kinds of things that one agency might be looking for. There are others. Let's put together these things as the aspirational goals by which we're striving to. And then we know what are the things we need to do to get there, because these are the kinds of things that they look for to get there. Whether or not you meet the standard before you get an investment grade rating, that's a different conversation. But right now we're saying we know what these things are. So let's work towards achieving these things. And then, it's a different conversation of whether or not a credit rating agency wants to make that decision, right? A lot of them are, got significantly burned because of what happened in 2015 and 2016. So they may be hesitant to actually make that decision, but let's position Puerto Rico to get there. That is what we're saying. That's what we're saying in the fiscal plan.
Okay, thanks. I have one other follow-up question. It kind of, I'm asking it because of, the concerns that you and board member Nixon expressed about how do you get Puerto Rico to kind of do the budgeting after the board is gone. Has the board clarified whether, the requirement, whether the legislature and the governor would actually have to pass a budget rather than having the board deemed it, do it itself in order for it to meet that balanced budget requirement?
Yeah, it is one of the things that we mention also, right, in the fiscal plan. And remember, in the fiscal plan, what we're trying to do here is say, let's acknowledge that we have to end this, right? And let's acknowledge what 209 actually says. And now the rest of the fiscal plan is let's do all the things to get there. I don't think it was envisioned that the board just passes budgets, they go away, and we're done. You haven't achieved fiscal responsibility in that way, right? There's no fiscal discipline. You haven't done any of the things that we're talking about. Last year, governor sent up a budget. It was certified. It was passed by both houses of the legislature. It's clear. This year, we hope to get to the same thing. There's a budget that was submission. It's not a painful budget. Both houses, hopefully we can reach an agreement there and we pass the budget, and then we have another one. But it shouldn't be that nobody does anything. And you get to July 30th and we have to just certify something in order to, not to have to pay the bills. Because that's what you would have, right? If somebody didn't act. So that's also something that we're addressing there. It is important for everyone to act responsibly. This requires negotiation. It requires compromise, but you can also get there. And I think last year, right, we did. The year before that, the legislature didn't pass the budget and the board had to certify, right, on its own. So that is one of the things also that we're looking at. And you have the modified accrual standard, which is also critically important. We cannot forget that.
Right.
And not on a cash basis. It's on modified accrual. Modified accrual is a different standard. We just recently received the 23 audited financial statements. We're looking at that. But the statements have, using reserves from prior years, right, in order to close out the books in that year, right? That's an issue with regard to modified accrual. Modified accrual is not an impossible standard, right? New York City has been working under modified accrual. They were at the brink of bankruptcy. Now they've been operating on the modified accrual since 75, and they figured it out. So can we here. But everyone needs to decide that this is something we want to do, and then put all the resources behind it. And we're prepared to do that and work with the government to make sure that happens.
Okay. So is that it? It's still not really clear to me. You're saying that they would have to do that for it to count, or
Yeah.
still being yeah. Okay.
All of the government has to act in order to pass a budget, for it to be a budget that's passed by the government.
Okay. Got it.
Gracias, John. Any other questions? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? No. Well, I guess that is it. Gracias a todos por participar en esta conferencia de prensa. Thank you, board members. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks,
Gracias a
everybody.
ustedes. Adiós.